Welcome to QuickMocker. Let's have a look on how to create new endpoints and prioritize them. We'll create fake REST CRUD services for user management. CRUD is an abbreviation for create, read, update, delete. So, when we are in the project view, hit Add Endpoint button. First, set the HTTP methods to get, put and delete that correspond to read, update and delete web services. Keep options method if you want to use those services from the browser app. URL path will be a regular expression pattern that can match any user object according to the rules of RESTful API. Wrap the user ID pattern in a parenthesis if you want to extract its value from the URL path and use it inside the response body. Make sure to activate the allow regular expression. In the response body, define a following JSON object. First, user ID property, and the value is URL param shortcode to extract the ID from the URL. The index is 0. It could differ depending on the number of the parameters in the URL. We'll add another dynamic value, confirmation code, and the value will be a random number shortcode. We'll separate min and max values using a colon. Finally, add a static property like name equals test. Leave response status code 200 and define a description of the endpoint. User dynamic, read, update, delete. Hit the Create button. In order to demo the prioritization feature, we'll add another endpoint with a non-regular expression URL path which falls under the URL pattern of the previous endpoint, but with a slightly different response body. So, add endpoint one more time. Select Get, Put and Delete HTTP methods and leave options if you need. In the URL path, enter user/demo1. No need for the regular expression. Use the same response body, but change the user ID value to demo1 because this is a non-regular expression URL. Also change name property from test to demo. Leave response status code 200 and define description of the endpoint as user static, read, update, delete. Hit the Create button. Every endpoint we create is added to the top by default and therefore it has more priority. User static endpoint will never be triggered in case we move it below user dynamic endpoint. Keep it below for now and later we'll move it up again. So define one more endpoint without regular expression by clicking the Add Endpoint button. Select Post method and leave options if you need. Set the URL path field to user. Inside the response body, define a similar JSON object as we did before. Because there's nothing to extract from URL path as a user ID, we'll use another shortcode, unique ID. Set status code to 201. This code is used in the REST API for successfully created objects. Description will be user create. Hit Create button. Alright, we have completed creating fake user CRUD services. Let's try to test everything. Switch to the Requests log tab to view incoming requests. Copy domain name and paste it inside the Postman app URL field. We'll be testing our services one by one. First, user create. Enter the URL path for user create service and select a post method. Hit the Send button. In the response, we've got our JSON object with the real values instead of shortcodes. Now, user read. Add a random ID to the URL and select Get method. Hit Send button. The user ID matches the ID from the URL path. Same with the put and delete methods. Still, the name value is test, even if we change the ID to demo1. Thus we need to get back to QuickMocker and move the user static endpoint above the user dynamic endpoint. Now, send a request again from the Postman. The name property has changed value from test to demo because its endpoint has a higher priority now. So, now you know how to create a fake REST resource using QuickMocker app and how to prioritize endpoints. Continue watching about QuickMocker functionality and features in the next videos.